Stop cleaning your house on this day. Rabbis say it drains your wealth fast. There is a pattern I have watched repeat itself across decades of quiet observation, and it has nothing to do with income brackets, stock portfolios, or the neighborhood you grew up in. I have sat across from families who earned substantial salaries and yet could never seem to hold a single dollar beyond the next unexpected expense. And I have watched other families, modest in their professions, unremarkable in their ambitions, build something slow and solid and unshakable over time. The difference, when I finally traced it back to its root, had nothing to do with discipline or luck. It had everything to do with something so simple that most people will dismiss it outright the moment I say it. It has to do with when you clean your home. Not how often, when. There is a specific window of time recurring every single week, when the act of sweeping, mopping, scrubbing, and decluttering your living space does not purify your environment. It evacuates it. It pulls out the very atmosphere of abundance that ancient sages spent lifetimes learning to cultivate, and sends it spiraling out into the street, where it dissipates into nothing and finds someone else to settle upon. I know how that sounds. I know it sits strangely in a world that teaches you to measure everything in percentages and quarterly earnings. But stay with me, because by the time I finish explaining what I learned from a man named Rebbe Zevulun Ehrenkrantz, a scholar who lived the last 40 years of his life in a small stone house in the hills above Safed, and who never once wanted for anything, you will not think it sounds strange at all. You will think it sounds like the most obvious truth you somehow spent your whole life walking around. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 11 years studying with Rebbe Ehrenkrantz and the circle of scholars who gathered around him. These were not ordinary students. Among them were physicians, architects, a retired judge, 2 men who had built and lost fortunes in business, and a woman named Adina Peltz, who had emigrated from Eastern Europe with nothing but a suitcase and an unshakable commitment to understanding why some lives accumulate and others perpetually scatter. What we were all seeking in our different ways was the hidden architecture of prosperity. Not prosperity as the world defines it, which is loud and brittle and exhausting to maintain, but prosperity as the ancient tradition defines it, a state of continuous, self-renewing sufficiency that flows from alignment with invisible laws. Rebbe Ehrenkrantz called these laws the grammar of the household. He believed, and the texts supported him, that every home possesses a spiritual signature, a living quality that either draws nourishment toward the people inside it or quietly, persistently repels it. The Zohar, that extraordinary repository of mystical teaching, describes this signature using the word tzinor, which means channel or conduit. A home, in this understanding, is not merely a shelter. It is a vessel through which the flow of divine abundance either passes freely or becomes obstructed. And the people living inside it are, whether they know it or not, constantly either widening that channel or narrowing it through the rhythms of their daily behavior. This was not metaphor to Rebbe Ehrenkrantz. It was precision. He had a way of explaining things through stories rather than abstractions, and the story he told me when I first raised this subject has stayed with me so vividly that I can still see the angle of afternoon light across his desk when he spoke. He told me about a man he had known in his youth, a craftsman named Mordecai Glassberg, who lived in a modest apartment in a crowded city and worked long, honest hours at his trade. Glassberg was skilled and diligent. He was not reckless with money. He saved where he could. And yet every time he managed to accumulate a small reserve, something would arrive to drain it. a broken pipe, a medical bill, a client who disappeared without paying. The pattern was relentless, and Glassberg had grown so accustomed to it that he had quietly stopped expecting anything else. One afternoon, Glassberg visited the home of an elderly neighbor, a man of no particular distinction in the world's eyes, a former bookbinder who owned nothing remarkable, and noticed that the old man's apartment had a quality to it that was difficult to name. It was clean, yes, but it was more than clean. It felt settled. It felt as though everything in those 4 rooms had been there for a long time and intended to stay. Glassberg asked the old man what his secret was. The old man said there was no secret. There was only a practice. He explained that every week, without exception, he prepared his home before the Sabbath arrived. He cleaned with intention, deliberately, in the hours before Friday's sunset. He removed every piece of garbage from the house. He straightened every surface. He brought bread and candles to the table. And then, from the moment the Sabbath began until it concluded the following evening, he did absolutely nothing to disturb the interior of his home. He did not sweep. He did not wipe counters. He did not haul bags to the rubbish bin. He rested. He read. He ate slowly and with gratitude. He allowed whatever had entered the house during that sacred window to remain undisturbed, to settle, to take root. Glassberg tried it for a month. Within the first 3 weeks, a client who owed him money for over a year appeared at his door with payment and an apology. A cousin he had lost touch with contacted him about a small partnership. His expenses that month, inexplicably, came in lower than they had in years. Glassberg, who was not a mystical man and had no patience for abstractions, told Rebbe Ehrenkrantz, "I do not understand why it works. I only know that it does." This is precisely the experience I want you to take seriously, because dismissing it as coincidence is the most expensive mistake you will ever make. Let me explain what is actually happening, according to the tradition. The Sabbath, Shabbat in Hebrew, the 7th day from Friday sundown to Saturday's emergence of stars, is not simply a religious observance or a cultural inheritance. It is, according to the Talmud and the Zoharic literature, the single most concentrated point of spiritual influx in the entire weekly cycle. The mystics describe it using the concept of Or Ein Sof, infinite light, which flows with particular intensity during this 25-hour window. This is not symbolic language. It describes a real phenomenon, invisible to ordinary perception, but documented across millennia of careful observation by those who trained themselves to notice. When this light enters a home that has been properly prepared, clean, quiet, intentionally arranged, it does not simply illuminate, it anchors. It settles into the fabric of the space. It deposits something that the tradition sometimes calls parnassa energy, a term referring to the spiritual raw material from which material sufficiency is woven in the days that follow. When you sweep during this window, you are not removing dust. You are removing that deposited energy before it has had sufficient time to take hold. You are, in the language of the Zohar, reversing the reception. The channel that was open closes again. The light that was settling lifts and disperses. This is why the Talmud does not merely suggest refraining from cleaning on the Sabbath as a matter of comfort or custom. It frames the prohibition in terms of spiritual consequence. The tractate Shabbat is explicit. Certain categories of labor on this day do not merely inconvenience the practitioner. They actively disturb the energetic conditions that support abundance. The sages who compiled these teachings were not legislators inventing rules for the sake of ritual complexity. They were scientists of the invisible world, and they were recording what they had verified through generations of careful observation and documentation. Rebbe Ehrenkrantz put it this way: "You cannot receive what you will not hold still for." Now I want to give you something entirely practical. Because understanding the principle is only the beginning. What transforms a life is the specific procedure, applied with consistency and intention over at least 30 days. Here is what you do. Beginning on Friday afternoon, no later than 2 to 3 hours before the sun sets in your area, you begin what I call the intentional preparation. This is not your ordinary hurried cleaning. This is a deliberate, unhurried act of preparing a vessel. Move through your home methodically. Sweep the floors. White the surfaces. Clear away clutter from countertops, tables, and shelves. This is the moment when physical cleanliness and spiritual readiness are the same action. There is one step that Rebbe Ehrenkrantz emphasized above all others, and it is the one that most people overlook. You must remove every piece of garbage from your home before the Sabbath begins. Not tidied up in a new bag sitting near the door, fully out of the building. The Zohar describes accumulated refuse using the term klipot, which refers to husks or shells, residue of spent energy, things that have been used up and are now decaying. When this material remains inside the house during the Sabbath, it does not simply occupy space neutrally. It creates a competing frequency, a kind of static that interferes with the reception of the incoming light. The sages were precise about this detail, and every elder I have ever studied with confirmed it from their own experience. Once the home is prepared and the garbage removed, you bring 2 loaves of bread, challah if you can find it, though any whole loaf will carry the intention, and place them on your dining table, covered with a clean cloth. You light 2 white candles. The bread represents trust in sufficiency. The Talmud teaches that the manna fell in double portion on the 6th day, so that the people would not need to gather on the 7th. By placing 2 loaves on your table, you are enacting this same declaration in miniature. You are telling the universe, in the only language it fully understands, which is the language of action, that you trust there will be enough. The candles, lit within 18 minutes of sunset, represent the invitation. The flame draws the light inward. The room changes when they are lit. You will notice it if you are paying even marginal attention. Then you stand in the center of your home, and you speak your intention aloud, not in your head, aloud. Say, "I welcome abundance into this space. I welcome sufficiency, steadiness, and peace. I release every anxious thought about scarcity. I trust in what is flowing toward me now, and what will continue to flow." This is not an affirmation in the modern sense, a piece of positive self-talk. In the Kabbalistic tradition, speech carries creative force precisely because it is the primary act by which the divine structured reality. When you speak with intention, you are participating in that same structuring. You are not wishing, you are declaring. The distinction matters enormously. From the moment the candles are lit until 3 stars appear in the Saturday night sky, approximately 1 hour after sunset, you do absolutely nothing to disturb the interior of your home. You do not sweep, you do not wipe down counters, you do not take garbage out, you do not do laundry, you do not reorganize closets, you do not vacuum. You rest, you eat, you read, you speak with people you love. You allow the silence to be full rather than empty. Every time the urge to clean something arises, and it will arise, especially in people who have spent years using constant activity as a substitute for genuine security, recognize it for what it is. It is the voice of scarcity, dressed up as productivity. It is the deep, exhausting belief that if you stop moving for even a single day, everything will collapse. That belief is the exact pattern keeping your finances in a state of perpetual unsettlement. The practice of Shabbat is, among other things, the direct antidote to that belief. It teaches the nervous system, not just the mind, but the body, that stillness is safe, that abundance does not require your frantic maintenance to continue arriving. Rabbi Ehrenkrantz once said something that I have never been able to improve upon. He said, "The wealthiest families I have ever known were not the ones who worked the hardest on Saturday. They were the ones who rested the most completely. Their rest was not laziness, it was confidence. And confidence in the spiritual economy is the currency that purchases everything." When Shabbat concludes on Saturday evening, before you resume your regular activities, take a moment to give genuine thanks. Not performative gratitude, not recited words, actual acknowledgement, however brief, that you received something during the past 24 hours, even if you cannot yet see what it was. This closing intention seals the practice and sets the tone for the week that follows. I want to be honest with you about the timeline of results, because false promises are an insult to genuine practice. Within the first day or two, you will likely notice something internal rather than external. A quality of calm that feels unfamiliar, not the exhausted relief of someone who has finally stopped working, but something more like steadiness. The low-grade financial anxiety that for many people hums constantly in the background will soften. This is the first sign. Do not dismiss it as nothing. Within 3 to 10 days of consistent practice, you will typically begin to see small, unexpected shifts in your material circumstances. A payment arrives that you had mentally written off. Someone calls with an opportunity that requires no seeking on your part. An expense that you braced for turns out to be less serious than you feared. These are not coincidences. They are direct reflections of the energetic shift occurring in your household. At the 30-day mark, if you have practiced without exception, without sweeping your kitchen floor on Saturday morning because the crumbs were bothering you, without convincing yourself that your situation is somehow different from everyone else's, you will have accumulated enough experience to draw your own conclusions. You will not need me to tell you it works. There are 3 warnings I must give you before I leave you with this. The first is about consistency. One violation does not simply reduce the effect by a proportional amount. It resets the accumulation. The practice works through compounding, and compounding requires an unbroken chain. If you sweep your floor on a Saturday because you cannot tolerate the disorder, you have not simply lost one day. You have interrupted the cycle and will need to rebuild it from the beginning. I have watched people undermine months of progress with a single impatient Saturday morning. Do not be one of them. The second warning is about intention. The Talmud contains a teaching, drawn on in various forms by scholars across many centuries, that the orientation with which you approach a spiritual practice determines what it opens within you. If you come to this with the mentality of someone trying to game the universe into delivering money on a schedule, you will find the practice uncooperative. It is not designed to serve greed. It is designed to align your interior life with the natural movement of abundance, which is generous and reciprocal, and deeply uninterested in the anxious grasping of someone who wants more without knowing why they want it. Come to this with gratitude. Come to it with the genuine desire to participate in something larger than your bank balance. The results will be proportional to the quality of your orientation. The third warning is subtler. Do not share this practice carelessly, not because it is a secret, but because it is living information. And living information requires a certain quality of reception to take root. If you describe it to someone who has already decided to mock it, you will leave that conversation feeling foolish, and that feeling will contaminate your own practice. Share it with people who are genuinely open, genuinely seeking, genuinely willing to try something the modern world would call irrational. Those people exist. Find them. I want to close with something that Adina Peltz, the woman I mentioned at the beginning who arrived from Eastern Europe with nothing, told me years after we had both left Rebbe Ehrenkranz's circle and gone our separate ways. She had built a quiet, comfortable life, nothing flashy, nothing that would make headlines. But she never wanted. She never scrambled. She never lay awake wondering whether the next month would be manageable. I asked her once what she considered the single most important thing she had learned in all those years of study. She said, "I stopped treating my home as a place where I lived, and started treating it as a place where something sacred was trying to arrive. Once I made that shift, the cleaning, the candles, the bread, the rest, none of it felt like effort. It felt like courtesy. And it turns out the universe responds very well to being treated with courtesy. The practice is in your hands now. What you do with it is yours entirely. Begin this Friday. Prepare your home before the sun descends. Remove every remnant of the week's accumulation. Set your bread and your candles. Speak your intention into the center of the room, and then let Saturday be what it has always been designed to be. Not a pause in your productivity, but a full, deliberate, unhurried opening. A vessel held ready. A life making room. The wealth that has been searching for somewhere to settle has been circling your house for longer than you know. All it needs is for you to stop sweeping it away.